Hello and welcome to this round 4 here at Pro Tour Dominaria. I'm Tim Willoughby, this is Simon Gertzen, and we finally get a chance to see those 75 card decks that so many teams have been working on for so long now to get a feel for what they want to be doing now that Standard has Dominaria in the mix. There are a few decks that are kind of known quantities, there are a few that maybe have a few surprises for us, and I'm sure that we'll get a chance to see a little bit of both in our feature match area as we head down now for round 4 here at the Pro Tour. Hello and welcome to this round 4 of Pro Tour Dominaria. I am Tim Willoughby, I am with Pro Tour winner Simon Gertzen, and we're going to get a chance to see our first little slice of Standard in our feature match area. All the players, you can see them just sat there getting ready to kick things off. And the match that we're going to be starting with, well, it's a tale of two fairly different levels of experience. On one side of things, we have Ivan Floch. Now, Floch is a seasoned professional at this game, member of Team Ultra Pro. He's got so much experience, he's going to be able to do great work in this event. And he's up against someone who has comparatively little experience at the Pro Tour. He's just the one GP top 8 there. We see him, Lance Austin. And if we're talking about Standard, there's been a lot of talk about the red decks in the field and the blue-white decks in the field. Neither of these players have shown up with those decks, Simon.
Yes, Tim, they have both decided to go for green decks, and they might look very similar in turn 1, but we will see that they actually play out quite differently.
Yeah, you can see the names of the decks on the bottom of the screen there. Ivan Floch is on a green-blue Karn deck, we're calling it. On the other side of things, Steel Leaf Stompy, and here's the reason that we refer to it as that. There's a potential for a turn 2 Steel Leaf Paladin. As things stand, it's Ronus the Indomitable off that Llanowar Elves. Llanowar Elves, a gigantic addition to this Standard format, does mean that we can see some very potent threats on the very second turn of the game. So on the other side of things, Aethersphere Harvester, green-blue Karn. This is a deck with a lot of artifacts in it and various ways of making sure that it can find those artifacts on time.
I really like that the Ultra Pro team has identified Aethersphere Harvester as such a good main deck card. We haven't really seen Aethersphere Harvester played that much, but it does block Heart of Karn, and it does block Goblin Chain Whirler. So 3-5 I think are really, really good stats.
Yeah, that 5 toughness, even with the 1 point of damage from a Chain Whirler, it's still relatively safe. And we're not going to see any of them in this matchup, but do not fear, there will be plenty of them across this Pro Tour as Merfolk Branch Whirler comes down. And there's Galta Primal Hunger on the top of Lance Austin's deck. That kind of one of the really big payoffs for being in this Steel Leaf Stompy list. Yes, it costs 12 mana to begin with, but you're typically playing substantially less for the Elder Dinosaur as and when it comes down. Heart of Karn getting crude. That means that Ronus the Indomitable are able to attack in. No blockers for Ivan Floch, so he's going to take the first damage of the game, dropping to 16. Heart of Karn, it briefly fell out of favor in Standard, but for almost the entire time that it's been available in Standard, it's been one of the format-defining cards.
Yeah, this is the vehicle of this Standard format. Some decks, we are calling them vehicle decks, and they are only playing for Heart of Karn, so that shows you how good that card really is.
As things stand, though, we look at Floch's hand here. He's got Aethersphere Harvester #2 alongside Sky Sovereign Console Flagship, Verdurous Gearhulk and Glintnest Crane there. The big thing that he's hurting for right now, just the 2 lands. If it weren't for that Llanowar Elves, he would be very short on mana indeed. As things stand, each and every turn that he's missing land drops is going to be turns that he's getting further and further behind on this board, and Lance Austin can deploy a lot of threats with minimal mana investment based on what he's working with.
Missing on Glintnest Crane there. Another punishment, but of course this is what happens. It's not guaranteed to give you an artifact.
All right, Implement of Ferocity coming down for Ivan Floch. We've got ourselves a reader here. I'm not necessarily too surprised to see Lance Austin looking at it. This is one of those cards that I've drafted it and not always played it. Simon, talk us through what's going on with this inclusion here.
The main reason why this card is in the deck is that it's an artifact that you can sacrifice when you want to, so it synergizes with Scrap Trawler, which we currently don't see on the battlefield, but you can see it there on the right-hand side. And now Ivan is actually just cycling it to get to his more powerful cards.
I'm not sure. Okay.
Yeah, I guess that it also does good work maybe pumping a Llanowar Elf if you want to make sure that it's not going to die to a Goblin Chainwhirler. Not a consideration here, but certainly something that will have been one of the many and various reasons for Ivan Floch and co. to consider it in their main deck inclusion. Here we have Lance Austin looking at a Steel Leaf Champion in hand. That one, a very, very efficient creature for its rate, and it means that Galta at Primal Hunger is going to cost next to nothing to cast here. Tapping a Llanowar Elf and one land to make a 12/12, that's a rate that we can all get excited about.
Yeah, he has an absolutely insane start there. Did he play an untapped Blooming Marsh? Trying to check his lands there, but
I think the first two lands were Blooming Marsh.
Ah, okay. The Llanowar Elf into Ronas, into two creatures, one of them Heart of Kiran, and then on turn 4, Galta with a Steel Leaf Champion. That's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I guess that in times past, red decks have been the decks that we've thought of as the ones that really punish bad draws from the opponent, but when a green deck can put this much power on the battlefield this quickly, it does mean that anyone that has even the slightest stumble in their draw finds themselves on the rough side of things. And here we see Ivan Floch just scooping up his cards. Lance Austin picking up the first game win here in decisive fashion very, very quickly indeed.
Yep, that's really difficult to handle. I think this draw would have beaten most decks, most players at this tournament. So even now has to rattle back after sideboarding.
And plenty of sideboarding, and of course more Magic soon enough. Do not go anywhere. We'll be back after these messages. Hello and welcome back. We appreciate you all visiting us here in Richmond, Virginia at Pro Tour Dominaria. And while our main match is just finishing their sideboarding, we're going to get a chance for a little bit of a look in on a different sort of a matchup going on. On one side of things, Andrei Stradsky, yes, he's playing a deck that you might recognize in the form of this blue-green Karn deck. But on the other side of things, just the one color of mana for Sean Sabia, he is on mono-black. This is a deck that we have seen variations on mono-black decks in the history of Magic, of course. More recently, at Grand Prix Birmingham, there was a deck on day one that did very well in mono black, but not something that's a mainstay of Standard, I would say, right now.
And this is quite an aggressive version. You see how many creatures are there on the battlefield. Also, the land's quite interesting. I'm intrigued what Sean is working with there.
Yeah, Sean got through the draft at a full 3-0 and is working on improving that record. 2 copies of Gifted Aetherborn there in play now. And the Aetherborn, you can see that if Sean was anticipating there being a lot of aggressive matchups, a fantastic choice, an efficient body, a bit of lifelink, a bit of death touch in there. And as things stand for Strasky here, he's got a Glintnest Crane with a counter on it. He's got another Implement of Ferocity, but not too much else going on just yet.
Yeah, so far the blue-green Karn deck has not been firing on all cylinders.
Sorcerer's Spyglass in hand for Strasky. And I can't imagine that this would necessarily have been a matchup that he was particularly thinking of when he put together this deck and made this deck choice.
Exactly. It looks like this blue-green deck is built for a very specific metagame of Chain Whirlers and creatureless control decks. So playing against mono black or even mono green is not what was on the what was the primary goal of building this deck.
Well, these Glintless Cranes, they're really not working out too well, at least on camera right now. Not quite sure on the exact artifact count in Andre Strasky's list, though we do see an artifact there for him in Sorcerer's Spyglass, and gets to see a big old demon on the other side of the battlefield in Sean Savier's hand. Whether or not that will be anything that he wants to trouble himself with too much, not quite sure. He gives it a little bit of a read, though. No hurt and harm in that. As we see Floch and Austin here just finishing up their preparations as they are going to be going into their game too. As we wait on the name there, Demon Lord Belzenlock just sort of eyeing up what Andre Strasky has going on. Not quite enough mana to cast it just yet, but it won't be too long until that changes. I kind of like how these things are looking here for Sean Sabier. He's on 26 life thanks to that Gifted Aetherborn damage. He is now facing down a big enough Glintnest Crane that at least he's going to lose a Gifted Aetherborn, but it will be a trade thanks to Death Touch. But this game looks like it might be going on for a little bit of time. It looks like the players in our main match just keeping their opening hands. We may get a chance to jump back to that soon. Liliana coming down here, and I think it's about time that we see whether or not Floch can bounce back after all of those dinos, all those big elves were able to take things for Austin in game 1. So this is post-sideboarded game, so there will have been some little spot adjustments on each side. I would say that Ivan Floch has the information advantage here because at least the green deck a little bit more of a known quantity. The 33-year-old winner of a Pro Tour starts things off with a Renegade map. And we can see that there is a copy of Karn in hand there alongside a couple of Glintless Cranes, so the potential to get some big things happening here. The Crane, of course, when it works out a fantastic rate, you get your 1/3 body in addition to finding yourself an artifact.
Oh, there was a time when Glintnest Crane even showed up in modern Affinity deck lists. I don't think it quite established itself, but that shows you how powerful such an effect can be.
Yeah, and in these days, not quite so many cards that let you search your entire deck coming along, but being able to look through the top some number and draw a card is something that we're seeing a little bit more of these days, and that time around Glintless Crane was able to do some good work, continuing to keep things flowing. And Simon, even when you're drawing a low impact artifact, just having a creature that's drawn you a card is still a palpable advantage.
Yeah.
Merfolk Branchwalker on the other side of things there, just coming down as a 2/1, the Explore finding a land. So everything that we said about drawing a card remains true on both sides of the battlefield, though I wouldn't be surprised if Lance would have been happy to have that Merfolk be a little larger in the face of a 1/3 on the other side of things.
Cards from the top until I exile non-land. If it's 4 or greater, repeat the process.
And there is Aethersphere Harvester. The biggest body on the battlefield right now, at least when it's crewed.
Really nice synergy of the crew one with a Glintnest Crane and Llanowar Elves. So another reason I really like this card.
Yeah, one of the easier vehicles to crew around, and Lance here, he's got a follow-up.
So I take
He's liking the the explore that he's got going on here. This time round, wow, it's just nothing but lands on the top of the deck. And I guess that the sort of the cold comfort that he has, even if his creatures aren't getting large, is that Change Light Ranger, it meant that he just got to draw those lands naturally rather than having to go through a couple of turns of lands where he might want to be drawing more spells.
He would have much preferred to have a 5-power 3-drop here, though.
I will tick this up.
So Ivan Floch here, he's going to have a little bit of thinking to do here. Taps out, and it is Karn. Karn, occasionally in this deck, I can imagine being a bit more aggressive about making constructs because there are so many artifacts in the deck anyway. And it looks like in this case, that's what we're going to see. It's amazing how the difference between having just one artifact in play and 2 or 3 gets a lot more exciting with those constructs that are created with Karn. There we go. First construct on board, at least in the constructed stages. We did see a little bit of that sort of action from John Finkel as he went to 3-0 with his Karn in Limited. But once we get to constructed, that's where Karn, I mean, just the power of the cards that he's drawing is that much higher, so he gets even more exciting if that's indeed possible. And Lance Austin, he's got his own vehicle now in Heart of Kiran. This is where he's able to start increasing the overall power level of his board, increasing the likelihood of being able to get down Galta good and early.
Yeah, he's up to 8 power now, should he crew Heart of Kiran. Not quite enough to cast Galta this turn, but it will most likely come down next turn.
And this is not a matchup where there's too much unconditional removal that's just going to be able to deal with that dino very easily. A 12-12 Trampler, it's not even as if you can just throw some sacrificial bodies in the way. You need some honest to goodness removal if you're going to deal with the legendary dinosaur.
Absolutely, and even, like I said, this is not the matchup he wants to face, although he has gotten to a much better start compared to Game 1, and also Lance's draw has not been as absurd.
So a construct jumping an Ethersphere Harvester, and now here comes Verdurous Gearhulk. So because the Harvester's already been crewed, that does mean that the Harvester able to get a +1/+1 counter alongside Glintless Crane, and it looks like it's Flyers versus Dinos.
I like the distribution of counters here. Even is playing against that Heart of Kiran on the other side. Both of his Flyers now have 4 power.
And Ivan Floch, recognizing that he's potentially in a racing situation, does use his Ethersphere Harvester ability to gain lifelink. Scrap Heap Scrounger in the graveyard for Lance Austin, so at some point he will be able to use the tiniest of black splashes that's available in his deck to get back that 2-drop. In the meantime, though, it is Ivan Floch who's getting his beat down on. Multiple copies of Galta Primal Hunger in Austin's hand. Now, Simon, it is a legendary creature. How much of a concern is that in terms of how many you want to play in a deck like this?
I don't think you want to be playing 4, because not only because it's legendary, but because it is quite expensive and situational. But ultimately, you don't really mind drawing 2 of them, because if you have a 12-12 on the battlefield and it sticks around, you're probably winning.
So Lance doing his dinosaur maths here, counting up the amount of power that he has available, figuring out how much his 12-drop is actually going to cost him. Okay, so the Heart of Kiran is getting crewed here. No massive surprises there.
No, but you can see that it's kind of awkward because you're tapping your vehicle even though you know that it won't be able to attack this turn.
I mean, there is a Crushing Canopy in hand for Lance Austin here if he wants. As things stand, he does just have to crew because it's more important to get the Galta in play. The Crushing Canopy at some point is going to be a big deal here, though.
This is a really interesting case of who's the beatdown. Is Ivan ultimately favored here if the game goes longer? I'm not so sure, because this 12-12 is something that green-blue is not very good at dealing with.
So Karn getting activated there, and we get a chance to see a nice one. Baral's Expertise out of the sideboard being one of the cards revealed. It's currently got a silver counter on it. That means that Karn will have to wait a little bit before he can pick that one up. But bouncing 3 permanents and then potentially casting a 4 or less cost card, that's a lot of bang for your buck.
Yeah, and that's the concession towards Galta in particular, I would say. If you can bounce your opponent's team, you're suddenly just really sweeping them away. It's not quite a River's Rebuke, but if you're bouncing Galta and 2 creatures that have added power to the battlefield, it's really difficult for Steel Leaf Stompy to come back.
As things stand, though, Karn kind of showing his stompy side now as those 2 constructs with the likes of Strap Trawler, with the likes of that Implement and the Renegade map, they're actually really quite large at this point. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 artifacts on the battlefield. 7 with the Verdurous Gearhulk. So each of those constructs representing a clear and present threat to Lance Austin's life total here.
Yeah, there might even be a point where Galta cannot attack because of the threat of being double blocked by multiple constructs.
So as things stand for now, Lance Austin is only taking a relatively small attack here, but how long that will last, uncertain.
Yeah, he's untapping now, but you can see that if this Galta is not strong enough to get an attack in, then he's almost drawing dead.
Yeah, the circumstances where your gigantic dinosaur is not good enough are not the circumstances where this green deck is winning.
And you can already see the writing on the wall because Baral's Expertise can come into Ivan's hand if he wants to.
6. There are 7 actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Oh, yeah, that's
The Verdurous Gearhulk there. Sneaky artifact that gets to also be a green spell. The sheer number of artifacts now becoming clear and revealing quite what a good card Glintless Crane is for this deck. It's likely drawing you a card and often giving you a choice as to which card you want to draw. Lance Austin on 12 here. Knows that he's going to be facing down potentially a big bounce spell here. I guess that he has the opportunity to attack Karn, but if he's attacking Karn, then he's not dealing damage to Ivan, who's on 28 life, and he's tapping down some of his creatures a different way.
If you ask me, it comes down to this Crushing Canopy. Can he really use that in a good way? For example, I think what would be quite interesting is if he can somehow surprise Ivan after a double block. Ivan will not expect a lot of removal out of mono green. So if maybe there is a block, an optimistic block of Galta, Crushing Canopy could have done more than just take out a Glintless Crane.
And it was a fairly big Glintless Crane at that point. But still, yeah, this is a tough old situation for Lance Austin, looking on at a Pro Tour winner with 28 life, a board full of permanents, and the win pretty clearly telegraphed between what's on the battlefield and that spell. Sat there with a silver counter on it. Killing off Karn will mean that the Baral's Expertise no longer a factor. Does Ivan Floch even need that big removal spell, though?
No blocks.
No blocks?
No blocks.
Okay.
Yeah.
You go to 16?
Yep.
Ivan Floch there with the ability to just say, I've got enough life total, I can take those attacks. And it's not a race that Lance Austin currently appears to be winning. Post-combat, he's still got Galta in hand, and he actually casts that second Galta in order to essentially untap the big legend. Legend rule comes along, you choose which copy of Galta you want to keep in play. One's tapped, one's untapped. Aside from that, they're essentially identical. And you know what, the untapped one, a little bit more important right now.
So Lance has one blocker, either the Galta or the Heart of Karn, but not both. And I think Ivan is just counting if he has lethal already here.
And there's Hashep Oasis sat there, tucked away in the land zone that represents a little bit more damage if needed. Here we can see Glintless Crane. If it finds an artifact, it means those constructs will get larger.
True.
Cruise up the Sphere Harvester.
Draw.
Make Scrap Trawler just a little bit larger.
Attack.
Yeah.
Now, Ivan Floch, most typically known as a control player, but it turns out he can turn creatures sideways just as well as anyone else, is able to square up that game. It's going to be going to a game 3 between Floch and Lance Austin here. And that means that we're going to get a chance to find out finally definitively which one of these two decks is better positioned, at least after sideboarding. But you will see that there's already one table cleared out, and we've got the other tables very much in progress. I'm going to get a chance to throw things down to my good buddy Marshall Sutcliffe on the floor to bring us updates from everything happening in our feature match area.
Thank you, Tim. So down in the feature match, we've already got one match down. That was Andrea Maguchi making short work of Niels Nerlander. Andrea's on red-black mid-range and just overpowered the blue-white Teferi deck. On our back table, we're still on our way here in game number 2 between the Citrus Assassin, Gregory Orange. He's playing against Ken Yukihiro. And he was able to take game number 1, did Gregory. They're in the thick of game number 2 right now. And on our back table, we had a little bit of a slower start on that one, but Sean Sabia with mono black actually beat Andre Strosky in the first game, and now they're playing their first sideboarded game over there right now.
Lovely stuff. Thanks, Marshall. Not a great surprise to see Greg Orange being the control. We know that that's kind of where he likes to be. I'm sure he won't have minded when Teferi got printed, gave him the opportunity to bust out the blue-white control once again. And it sounds like as these players are just finishing up sideboarding, we may get a chance to have a little look in on some more of Sean Sabia and Andre Strasky as they are now in their sideboarded game. So as a reminder, Sabia on the left of our screen, he is on mono black. And Andre Strasky, well, we're coming to learn a little bit about these blue-green control decks. And here we see Lifecraster's Bestiary coming in. I presume that's a post-sideboard edition for Andre Strasky here. Plenty of black mana available to Sean Sabia, so he's going to be able to deploy his threats comparatively easily. And this, at least in terms of life totals, still very much the early stage of the game. 17 to 18, the life total there after that attack with just the one creature there, and a lurking Ravenous Chupacabra coming along now in order to deal with the one creature on Andre Strasky's side of things. And this, I guess, one of the differences that the blue-green deck has after sideboarding, Simon. We see our first counterspell of the format.
Yeah, Metallic Rebuke is a card that not everybody has on their radar for sure. And it's an interesting one because you are playing these cheap artifacts, and suddenly you can only tap one land and you get almost a hard counter.
A few people definitely caught napping on that one. And I think I guess that's one of the attractions of playing this blue-green deck in total, regardless of anything else, that this is less of a known quantity in the format, and being able to get some sort of an advantage in that regard, a very big deal. Just a quick update, it sounds like Greg Orange has been able to secure his victory over Ken Yukihiro. Yukihiro, a very, very creative deck designer, and I'm sure that we get a chance at some point to find out what he's brought to the table. But right now, though, he's going to have to find a way of bouncing back after having taken an early hit here. And we get to see Verdrus Gearhulk from Sean Sabia. That was a card that was borrowed from Andre Strasky's deck, soon to be put back in his graveyard thanks to still more counter magic from Strasky here.
Strasky's just running away with this game. The Lifecraft's Bestiary, I believe, is in this sideboard to battle, in particular, blue-white control or Esper control. But if you're playing against an interesting mono-black control deck, not quite control, but mid-range 2 control deck, then it's also doing really good work.
Yeah, it's interesting the different faces of control. That mono black certainly can be a controlling deck, but it's doing so more by removing creatures from the battlefield, hitting cards in hand with discard, rather than your sort of classic counter magic control that you might see in other lists. And here we get a chance to see Walking Ballistas being brought back with Scrap Trawler. That's one of the attractions of playing this artifact deck.
Exactly. This is what the deck wants to be doing. Walking Ballista's casting cost in the graveyard is 0. So if you sacrifice Implement of Ferocity, not only do you get a counter and you get to draw a card, but you also get to take a Walking Ballista back from your graveyard.
Well, it looks like Andrzej Straczki kind of sealing things up here in Game 2. And remember that they do have the potential still for a Game of 3. We've already got a Game 3 all queued up. Let's head back down to our main table as we have the deciding game between Ivan Floch and Lance Austin. Ivan Floch, he's on this green-blue Karn deck that is something of a new addition to Standard with this Pro Tour here in Richmond, Virginia. On the other side of things, Lance Austin, he is on Steel Leaf Stompy, hoping to bounce back after a tricky Game 2. So turn 1 Llanowar Elves from Lance Austin, no need to hold back on them whatsoever, and it looks like Ivan Floch likes that plan enough that he's going to do the exact same thing on the other side of things, and we'll see who's able to leverage that the most. Merfolk Branchwalker coming down, drawing a land for Lance Austin, and it looks like that might be the land that he's going to end up playing here. Immediately plays the additional forest, so no 3-drop for him on turn 2. We'll find out whether or not the same can be said for Ivan Floch.
Yeah, and Austin wasn't holding a land.
The rest of the cards in hand for Austin, pretty solid. I guess that when you've got multiple copies of Merfolk Branchwalker and you've got the Llanowar Elves that you know isn't going to get killed off too early, it's actually a much safer keep than it first sounds.
No, it wasn't a bad keep. It's just interesting how important these Branchwalker triggers actually are.
Now, Ivan, plenty of options available to him here. In principle, he could even be looking at a Walking Ballista to kill off a Llanowar Elves here, but does go for a Glintless Crane initially. And a whole host of different options available to him here. If he wants to, he will be able to utilize that extra mana from Llanowar Elves this turn, as there is an Implement of Frosty in there as a 1-mana artifact. Ivan Floch here just carefully comparing the cards on top of his deck to the cards in his hand. Very careful not to combine the two until he's sure about what he wants to take. Ultimately goes for Implement of Ferocity. And I've been quite impressed with how the little artifact has been working out thus far in this deck. Plays a Llanowar Elves for this turn so that he can be sure of having an explosive amount of mana on subsequent turns.
The little artifact that could.
I mean, Walking Ballista is the sometimes little artifact that could. Implement of Frosty is always pretty little and sometimes can. Lance Austin here, he really does need to find himself a land relatively soon, and it looks like we're going to see another Merfolk Branchwalker from him in the hopes of achieving exactly that goal. There it comes. There is the land on top. Sometimes exploring finding a land is exactly what you want to happen, and by playing a different land there, I guess that it means that he is able to hide from Ivan Floch how important drawing land would actually be at this point. Scrap Heap Scrounger coming down. The Scrounger, the one sort of lone reason, at least in the main deck, to be concerned with being able to make black mana.
I'm a bit surprised that we see Floch holding Sorcerer's Spyglass, because I wasn't expecting that to be an important card in the matchup when you're facing effectively mono green deck. Going to be interesting to see what he names with it.
Yeah, I suppose that there are maybe some vehicles that are of a little bit of concern there. I mean, if I'm Ivan Floch, just knowing what's in my opponent's hand is something that's periodically kind of convenient.
And you want to have a higher artifact count for your Glintless Cranes and your Karns. It might also just be Scrap Heap Scrounger, but I don't know if Scrap Heap Scrounger is really that big of a problem.
Now in the background there, you can see a smiling face for Andrzej Straczki there. He was able to square things up. They are going to be going to a Game 3. In the meantime, though, we do have our Game 3 here to concern ourselves with. And in this early stage, I would say that there's maybe a tiny edge for Ivan Floch, but it's yet to really play out in any substantial way. It's going to be who gets to play a big threat soonest. This Crushing Canopy, not really too crushing a blow for Ivan Floch just yet. He's going to take some hits here from the collection of Merfolk and Scroungers on the other side of the battlefield, but these comparatively small swings compared to what the green deck can really achieve.
I haven't been impressed with the Crushing Canopy. If the best you can do is to kill a Glintless Crane that didn't even have any counters on them, I don't think that's where you want to be.
Yeah, it almost smacks of there just not being enough cards and ways to interact in this matchup. Though, when there are the likes of Aethersphere Harvester and so on in there, I can definitely see where the appeal of killing flying creatures is. But this might be a case of Ivan Floch having successfully hornswoggled his opponent, come along with a deck that's not quite so familiar, and left Lance Austin clutching at straws a little bit to figure out exactly what he wants to be doing in post-sideboarded games. Sorcerer's Spyglass sees Aethersphere Harvester and Galta Primal Hunger. One of those has an ability that's reasonable to turn off with that Sorcerer's Spyglass. With a Llanowar Elves already in the graveyard, though, I can see the appeal of getting that Scrap Heap Scrounger too.
And Ivan opted to play Sorcerer's Spyglass, holding back on the Karn in his hand.
So he names Aethersphere Harvester. That one will be essentially a vehicle without an engine at this point. No ability to crew it, no ability to send it to the air, or indeed to give it lifelink.
Yeah, now Floch just has to be careful not to draw his own Harvester.
Here's a symmetrical effect. And Implement of Ferocity, we're seeing potentially its interaction with Walking Ballista. If there's a creature you want to put a +1/+1 counter on, very efficient indeed to do so to that Walking Ballista. As things stand, though, 4 mana means that, for now at least, Ivan Floch electing to just put a counter on the old-fashioned way. Doesn't spend the 4 mana on Karn just yet. I'm intrigued as to at what point he's going to pull the trigger on the big planeswalker there.
Yeah, for now, his decision was that he's under too much pressure. He wants to build up a stronger board first. And here you can see him smartly take out the strongest of Lance's creatures, so that at least Galta is not an issue in the upcoming turns.
We saw Walking Ballista there, dealing with 2 creatures before itself ending up in the graveyard. And in this deck, at least, Walking Ballista being in the graveyard, not the end of the world. There is the potential to get it back with a Scrap Trawler at some point. And you can see, in spite of the look on Ivan Floch's face, he's actually doing pretty great in this game. His life total a little lower, but the threats that he has on the battlefield, solid enough, and we know that he has that Karn in hand. And Karn Scion of Urza is a very big deal indeed. Already 2 artifacts in play, meaning that any constructs that get made are going to be good ones. And even if he's just drawing cards, he's drawing cards.
And he actually managed to disable Aethersphere Harvester, and despite of that, Lance's best play was to cast a vehicle that he will not be able to crew.
All right, here comes Karn. And in this instance, Ivan Floch electing to draw cards. Seems likely that he's going to get given the land here of the 2. More often than not, Karn, or at least on the first activation, getting you a fairly lackluster card. But sooner or later, there's going to be 2 impressive hits at the top of the deck. And of course, it's sat there with a silver counter. I mean, this Karn, or indeed a future Karn, can get it back as needed. Drawing into another Karn there off that Implement of Ferocity. Always nice to have a backup. It does mean that potentially if you end up exiling a really important card that you need to draw a little bit sooner than waiting for your next turn, you can cast a second Karn, choose to keep that one, and then use the minus ability to fetch out from the ether that exiled card with a bit of silver on it.
Implement of Ferocity making Llanowar Elves a 2/2. So now Lance's Llanowar Elves are not attacking, I would assume. But Scrap Heap Scrounger, of course, coming in.
Now, Ivan Floch still content, it would seem, to take this damage. He's at 6 life now. At what point does he need to start being a little bit cagey about allowing these attacks to go through?
Well, he can take 1 more hit for sure. He's playing against green, so he doesn't have to be afraid of burn spells. But this is the latest way he has to start turning things around. I think he's on a really good way, though, if you look at the fact that he has an active planeswalker.
Karn Scion of Urza, potential to make more creatures if he needs. Baral's Expertise, that can deal with one of the threats on the other side of the battlefield, or a couple of the threats on the other side of the battlefield, should I say. I hesitate to call that Aether Harvester a threat right now.
Yeah, it's more like decoration on the battlefield. I like this line, just getting the crane here with a very good chance of getting something else off it.
So digging 4 deep, looking for an artifact, finds a couple of options. Aether Harvester of his own, that's going to the bottom of the deck. Does not want that one, but a Scrap Trawler, a fantastic pickup here. That one will be able to allow him to rebind some of the big key artifacts that he has in the graveyard soon enough, as and when his artifacts go to the graveyard. And Implement of Ferocity, the perfect artifact with which to get back Walking Ballista. And at this point, everything rocking and rolling for Ivan Floch. Ignore those live totals. It is not going to be too big of a concern for him to be able to deal with the creatures on Lance Austin's side of the battlefield. Lance with just the 1 card in hand. Ivan Floch, his deck has, in 1 game, shown itself to be pretty decent on the beatdown plan, making those constructs attacking in. But it can feel pretty controlling too.
This turn, he added a 1/3 flyer to the battlefield, a 3/2 Scrap Crawler. He drew a card with Implement of Ferocity, got back a Walking Ballista, and made his flyer a 2/4. That's very impressive.
And there have been times that various of these cards have been question marks as to whether or not you would include them in your draft deck. It's amazing how Synergy takes some of these cards from being pretty ho-hum inclusions in any deck you're looking to build and sends them through the roof powerful and allows them to potentially be in a Pro Tour winning deck.
And Lance is now looking to win in the air. I think is his real opportunity here, because I don't see ground attacks being fruitful anymore.
So Ivan Floch there elected to trade his Scrap Trawler with Scrap Heap Scrounger. At some point the Scrounger will be able to come back because there are a fair number of creatures in Lance's graveyard. He got back an Implement of Ferocity into the bargain. I guess that we're learning just how important Implement of Ferocity is to a lot of what Ivan's got going on here. At absolute worst, it's 2 mana, put a counter on a creature, draw a card. And if that's the worst, that's not too bad. You can see Floch there just running through the calculations in his head as to what he wants to do with that Karn. He elects to tick it down in order to put a construct onto the battlefield. That construct, currently just a 2/2, the Sorcerer's Spyglass alongside the construct itself, the only things that pumping up. But we know that there's at least 1 artifact in hand for Ivan Floch. And Lance Austin, you can see him there. He just has to sit back and watch as all of this goes on. A lot of mana being tapped here, and I believe that this is going to be a large Walking Ballista indeed, coming down with a full 4 counters. And right now, it's not even as if Ivan Floch has too much that he desperately needs to kill. He shoots down the Llanowar Elves simply because he can. But next turn, he's going to get to untap, potentially attack with that Walking Ballista, and indeed do more damage. Or as we see here, he's threatening to deal with Scrap Heap Scrounger before it can really even get attacks on.
Yeah, and before it can count for Galta's cost reduction. You could see Floch counting carefully the mana of Lance, and Lance is stuck there with Galta in his hand.
Yeah, Galta, it's easy a large proportion of the time to kind of ignore the gigantic 12 mana casting cost because it's never really costing that much. But right now, his battlefield completely without creatures, and that means that the legendary Elder Dinosaur is a bit of a drain on his wallet, not able to put that one into play anytime soon. And in the meantime, more constructs coming down. It's time for Karn to start showing that he can pose a threat in the red zone. Here comes Implement of Ferocity, a cheap way of putting more counters on Walking Ballista, drawing extra cards for Ivan Floch, and potentially, in no time at all, sealing up this game. A new Karn coming along, and that means still more construct tokens being generated. The fresh Karn coming along, immediately spending a couple of loyalty to make yet another construct. All of these constructs getting bigger thanks to all of the artifacts in play. And a robot army will be rumbling into the red zone soon enough. It's really interesting to me to watch how Karn, in different situations, in different games, goes from being this card advantage engine that seems perfectly happy and reasonable and exciting to have in many decks to being a way of closing out games at surprising speed.
Yeah, without having a real ultimate like other planeswalkers, these constructs just grow and grow, and at some point they are almost impossible to stop.
All right, so big draw step for Lance Austin. He gets back that Scrap Heap Scrounger once again. I mean, something like a Steel Leaf Champion even, just so that he could have a 3-mana way of reducing his the cost of his Galta by 5, getting a few extra bodies on the battlefield, might be interesting. As things stand, though, has to scoop up his cards. It is Ivan Floch who wins here. He advances to 3-1, his green-blue Karn deck, taking down Lance Austin. You can see there just the tiniest hint of a smile on his face. Picking up the first win in the Constructed deck, you know that you're going to have at least 10 rounds of Constructed if you're looking to get the really top finishes. And, of course, our top 8 will also be Constructed, so important to make sure you've got the you know, just warmed up, got things going a little bit with your Constructed list as we now move across to see our final match going on in our feature match area. This is the deciding games between, on the left of our screen, it's going to be Sean Sabia against Andre Stratsky. So there is Sean. He is on mono black up against the blue-green list. And we can see about the largest Llanowar Elves you're likely to find, a 6/6 Llanowar Elves. That's the original artwork by Anson Maddox there. You don't have to play with the copy printed in Dominaria in order to be able to get it going. And Noxious Gearhulk here getting dealt with by Vizier of the Many Faces, coming along, doing a very good impression of that Noxious Gearhulk, enough to kill the main creature that Sean had going on. And while Sean does have a colossal life total advantage here, 35-12 right now, 29-16 if you will, after all of the dust has settled from the various noxious elements. Andre Stratsky, he's not going to be able to close this game out fast, and with that gifted Etherborn on the battlefield, big creatures on their own might not be enough.
Pretty intense turns there. Virtuous Gearhulk into Noxious Gearhulk, into a copied Noxious Gearhulk. Sean still thinking about hitting with his Death Touch creature. Death Touch lifelink, of course.
Yeah, I guess that when you've got that much life to work with, there's just this big temptation to do things a little differently. As things stand, though, Liliana coming along, bringing back Noxious Gearhulk. This is the third Noxious Gearhulk, at least, of this deciding game here.
And the fourth Gearhulk in a row.
35? Yeah.
So that was the -3 ability. Still a little bit of ability left for Liliana Death's Mastery here. And even with the Menace on the Vizier of Many Faces copying Noxious Gearhulk, he will not be able to get a clean attack in on Liliana without a bit of help from whatever is in hand here.
Pretty sweet deck here.
Yeah, I like it quite a bit. That this is a list that can simultaneously control what's going on the board while providing a little bit of a clock. Not quite certain on how much of this is main deck versus sideboard right now, but Andre Stratsky here forced to at least threaten Liliana. Liliana quite cleanly getting killed off by the attacks here, and that to me signaling that maybe Sean has either another copy of the Planeswalker sometime relatively soon, or that he thinks that he can just win this race cleanly enough, having gained that life from all of those Noxious Gearhulks.
And also, Sean didn't really want to block a Noxious Gearhulk Vizier, because then suddenly it can come back from the graveyard. And also, it has Menace, so you might be running into some kind of tricks. Sure, losing your Planeswalker is a cost, but probably a smart play.
A lot of mana available to Sean Sabia here. He has a fine line on being able to do cool tricks with deserts here, in addition to what he has going on just from making black mana. And it looks like we're going to have a Demon Lord coming down here. Bells and Lock. A lovely way of making sure that you're able to keep those cards a-flowing. Yes, it's going to cost a little bit of life in the process, but Fatal Push is the draw there. It takes 1. The mana cost was not 4 or greater, so that is the end of the value train from Demon Lord Bells and Lock. In the meantime, though, 6 mana flying 6/6 Trampler is exactly the kind of thing that's going to be giving Andre Stratsky pause. He's on 9 life. He's really got not much to work with here.
What is the question?
Basically, I'm asking, is it still a 4/4, or is it a 4 mana or 6 mana? Because it comes with a copy. I just didn't know how the copy exactly worked. Is it an exact copy?
So it will gain the mana cost of the copy, the thing that it copies.
Yep.
Okay, confirming some details here, because if Vizier of Many Faces was still a 4 casting cost Gearhulk on the battlefield, then Fatal Push might have a target, but it's actually not. If it copies a Noxious Gearhulk, it has converted mana cost 6 on the battlefield.
All right, here comes Karn. We saw Karn doing fantastic work for Ivan Floch mere minutes ago. Andrei Strasky, he's going to have to lean hard on that Planeswalker if he's going to find a way back into this one.
And this is where Karn doesn't really shine. If you're really desperate for a solution, giving your opponent the choice of the card is not what you want to be doing.
Instead, electing to spend 2 loyalty on a 2/2 construct. Obviously, the potential for it to get bigger as more artifacts come along, but equally, against a black deck with a fair amount of removal, it may be that the creatures are vanishing rather than appearing for Andrei Strasky here, who sits with just 1 card in hand, that being another copy of Metallic Rebuke.
If Strasky had that Metallic Rebuke when Liliana came down, I think he would be the clear favorite to win this game and this match. But now, Sabia has just so much power on the battlefield.
And I guess that one thing that Karn has achieved there is it has bought Andrei Strasky a clean turn as a big attack from Demon Lord Belzenlock takes down the Planeswalker there.
That's an interesting decision. Why do you take out Karn there? It wasn't all that threatening, I think.
Yeah, I guess that it's easy to have sort of internal heuristics, rules of thumb, if you will, about what to do when your opponent has a Planeswalker and you've not got a clean kill. Get rid of the Planeswalker while you can. That's what Sean Sabia went with. He's on 36 to 9 life. Not too much damage left to deal for him in order to win this first match of Standard. Already at 3-0 after the draft, so had a fantastic start to this Pro Tour. Just really doesn't want to mess it up.
9 minutes extra time from now.
So regular time in our feature match area has been called, but these guys have got a bit of an extension. We tried to hold their match a little bit so we could bring you just that little bit more magic on camera. We hope you appreciate that wherever you're watching from around the world. And Andrei Strasky, he's going to have to go deep into the tank to find a way out of this one.
Yeah. Metallic Rebuke, not so good when you're being attacked by giant demons.
Backup copy of Demon Lord Belzenlock in hand here.
I was not expecting Demon Lord Belzenlock to show up in high numbers at this Pro Tour, for sure.
I mean, when you look at all of his abilities, what he's got going on, it's a very neat little package. 6 mana, 6/6 flyer is already a fantastic rate, and then you're drawing at least 1 card when it comes into play, so even if your opponent can cleanly kill it, you've still generated some amount of card advantage there.
I'm going to deal damage to this one. And I'm going to attempt to... Yeah, just this one.
When you pass, right?
Yep, in response to you putting a counter. Push.
So this is in response to Andrei Strasky trying to put counters on Walking Ballista using a Fatal Push. That means that by the time that that counter would go on, Fatal Push will already have resolved. So effectively he's stopped one of the counters available for Andrei Strasky here. Good timing from Sean.
Yeah, Strasky still gets 3 damage out of the deal.
Damage.
Yep.
Everything dies. I'm good to 3.
Great, yeah.
The demon lives. This one lives. And
Yeah,
everything
no.
is-
Yeah, the Demon Lord was not blocked there, so that one's pretty safe.
Add -1.
Yeah.
You shot it once.
No, this is actually really well played by Andre. So Andre managed to
It's right here.
kill Sabia's board except for the Demon Lord because he had an artifact that didn't really look like an artifact. That was the Vizier, of course.
Let's get rid of this. Crack all graveyards.
So Graveyard's getting exiled there. thanks to Scavenger Grounds being activated. Plenty of deserts in Sean Sebier's mono-black control deck. Ultimately, after all of that good play from Andrei Stradsky to be able to give himself even a chance, it was still Sean Sebier with his mono-black deck able to take the victory there. And I'm sure that there'll be plenty of people trying to look out and find out a bit more about that mono-black deck. We're not going to start throwing around deck lists just yet, but you know what? I'm sure that if you're looking to find it out, our text team will be able to help you out at some point before the end of this weekend. Fantastic round of Magic and a fantastic opportunity to see some of the new cool innovations in this format. Even though there's been a little bit longer for people to prepare than normal, still a few surprises, and I'm sure we'll have more of them over the course this weekend. Do not go anywhere. We will have more commentary of this Pro Tour for you back from our news desk after these messages.
Play Standard each week to win special Standard Showdown prize boosters. Dominaria Standard Showdown events are being held near you. Find a location to play at magic.wizards.com/Standard Showdown.
Welcome back to Pro Tour Dominaria. Round 4 is just about done. In fact, that Sean Sabia match with Andre Strasky that you just saw was the last match of the round. So we're gearing up for round number 5. Behind me, the players milling around, waiting for their pairings. So it's time, as we traditionally do, once we convert ourselves from limited to constructed, to start talking deck techs. And so waiting for us over at the wall with Maria Bartholdi is our first guest of the weekend, Luxembourg's finest, Steve Hatto.